Welcome to the first episode of Slots and Locks, a podcast about the world of casinos and sports betting, built for players who ask why, not just who to pick. I'm Tim.
Yeah, and I'm Chris Mello. I go by Mello. We are longtime experts in online casino gambling space. We're data nerds, fantasy sports players, friends, debatable, and sports bettors. We started this show because we love to banter and talk about the psychology and math behind the games and to poke a little fun at one another. And we think more people should understand how all this stuff actually works.
Every week we'll break down the casino side, another angle from the broader sports betting world. It could be sports betting, DFS, prediction market, sweepstakes, you name it. We'll cover it all. And we're hyper focused on the data side of things and looking at it from an insider perspective.
Yeah, we're not giving hot takes or chasing picks or telling you can win a casino slot machine with a system because those don't work. We're here to open the hood and explain the machine. We'll talk the mechanics, the player behavior, the volatility curves, session data, modeling approaches, and occasionally tell some wild stories from inside the casino and sportsbook world.
Right, so let's kick off very first episode here, and we're gonna touch upon a classic, which is really about slots. A game that we're gonna show in a few minutes here with Cleopatra, which is one of the classics games of online gaming of all time. But before we get into that, I think we should talk about the bare bones, everything behind the slots, the terminology, things like that. So, Chris, what's in a slot machine that makes up a game that you see, whether it be on the floor or online?
Are you talking about the components and the terms?
We can do that.
Well, traditionally, from a player perspective, the theme and presentation is key. You want the visual look and the audio to be attractive. And that's the first hook for anything or anybody, really, not just a slot machine. Once you get into you get attracted to the game, you do deeper searches, and that is the math model. Everything circulates around the math model. I always like to look at a math model as a game mechanic, and that is how do I win? So if I'm playing a slot machine, what's going to be the real configuration, the 777, whatever that is, to actually give me a win? And before we go into that, there are two main types of slot machines. One is a stepper, which is the old physical reels. It actually has a spool in the machine. It actually turns. There's a finite number of options it can actually display. The second is the video. The video is, it could be a 5 reel, it could be more, could be multiple, infinite, really. Well, not infinite, because you have physical space you still have to deal with. But that's where you get a little bit more granular in the flexible lines, richer features. And then from there, you can get into the math part of it. And that is the return to player. Basically, the hold rate from a casino perspective. And that is how much is the actual casino going to take from the player on a spin basis. The second thing is volatility. That is how the distributions of payouts are going to come, the size and the spread of the payouts. Are you going to like win a little bit here and there, or are you going to win a large chunk at some point in time? The next thing is the hit frequency. That details a lot with the volatility because you could actually quote unquote win, but you actually are losing on from a money perspective. The fourth thing is the bonus trigger rate. That is the likelihood of entering the bonus, which
Fourth,
is
fifth, it doesn't matter, right? I
what's
said
that?
fourth, fifth. Fourth,
Fourth.
it doesn't.
No, yeah, I'm losing the count in my head, so it's all good. That's the bonus trigger rate. It's the likelihood of entering the bonus. And the last thing is sort of the bets, the lines, the ways, the structure. Basically, you're telling the machine how much you want to bet and how much you want to wager. That also will trigger the hit frequencies, the bonus payouts, and everything in between. I have a trivia time. In your experience with game design, what constantly comes up as probably the most important component from a design perspective, but is probably the least understood by the players, Tim?
That's a good question, but you sound so structured in terms of your question. It's almost
Ro-
like you set it up.
robotic, really.
Yeah, exactly. No, but seriously, like Chris mentioned a lot of good, or Mello, I should say. I can't call it Chris. Mentioned a lot of different mechanics and things like that of the game itself. But I think the least understood is probably the volatility. And the best way, whether I've had new employees come in or people that are outside the industry who've talked to it, I think the best way to kind of describe it is just a roller coaster. So when you think about a ride, you go up a roller coaster and then it goes down and things like that. And so if something has a high volatility, you could lose 30 spins in a row and then hit really big for a bigger win. Think about a roller coaster that is like this and then it curves up at the end. And a low volatility game is the exact opposite. They call them dribblers, which are small little wins. So you could bet $1, you might get 20 cents back. Typically, low volatility are for people that don't play slots that want to come in there, and they give a feeling of kind of winning, even though you're not winning. But players that play a lot of slots that are veterans or avid players lean towards higher volatility slots. Now, the thing with those two terminology and volatility is that, and we don't want to get lost here, is that that doesn't necessarily impact the return to player or RTP. You mentioned it earlier, which is basically an RTP is you put $1 in, how much money you're going to get back. The inverse of that, which is the whole percent. So, for instance, if the RTP was 95%, the whole would be 5%, meaning if you put $1 in, on average, you're going to get 95 cents back. And the casino is going to keep 5 cents. Those two games that could be a high volatile game, a low volatile game, both could have a 95% return to player, but the ride itself, the experience in the game could be completely different.
Yeah, so that
Make
gets
sense?
us. I mean, I've been doing this for years. An RTP reality checks by law in most jurisdictions where there's a positive regulation, which is a demonstration of legitimacy from a slot perspective. Each game has an RTP that has to be displayed somewhere in the terms and conditions. A game with a 95 RTP, you could have two different games and they can have two different volatilities and two different game feels. But in layman's terms, RTP really just is the amount of money you're going to get paid back per dollar. So if it's a 95% payback RTP, you're going to get 95 cents back for every dollar you bet. The trick, though, is that is over a huge number of samples. When they test these games, the histograms, which determine the RTP, they're done on millions of spins over a session. The RTP is based on a single wager. It's not a promise for a particular session. If you're going to bet 100 spins, that is a small sample size for a million spins, which is what it was based on. And so your real life RTP is not going to be match the actual machine's RTP.
Yeah, and let's break it down to layman terms. I hear this all the time from people where they say slot games are rigged. They're cheating me or something like that. But if you think about it, that's how they're designed. That's why casinos make a ton of money. That's why they're in business. It's the math model. You can call it rigged or a scam or whatever you want to call it, but it's highly regulated. It had to go through something called GLI, which is a regulatory body. Effectively, it's not rigged. It's mathematically designed this way over the long term. Lose money.
Yeah, the machine is literally telling you it's going to pay you less money than you contribute.
Yeah, and I always make a joke when anyone asks me that doesn't work in the industry, what games do you play when you go to Vegas or go to a casino? And I said, do you want to win money? And they say, yeah. And I say, don't play at all. But if you do want to play, do it responsibly and have a budget and maybe you get lucky.
Yeah, you have to set your amount you're willing to lose. Or look at it from an entertainment standpoint. In a nutshell, aside from the whole psychology of it, it's entertainment.
Exactly. And whether you go out to dinner or go to a movie, it's the same type of budget.
So we are stressing responsible gaming, Tim.
Yes, 100%. But that doesn't mean you can't have fun. All right, I think we should jump into and set this up. It'd be great to kind of show a game. We want to do this similar format kind of every week. And we wanted to start with the classic, which is Cleopatra. For background, both Chris and I worked at IGT, originally WageWorks back in the early to mid 2000s. And Cleopatra itself was in the land-based side, so you walked into a physical casino in the mid 90s. We rebuilt the game on the online side, and that I think it launched in the early 2004, if I'm not mistaken, and brought it to the interactive market in the UK.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about like this game versus Wheel of Fortunes and Monopolies and things like that?
Do I?
Or should I?
I
Well,
mean,
we prior to this, a lot of the games and why this game is so unique is that they've really had like Wheel of Fortune, Monopoly, Price is Right. They're all branded games, and they went through a whole theme of building these branded titles, which are classic games. The Wheel of Fortune games are huge, and maybe in a future episode we'll go through those as well. But Cleopatra is one of those games they built from scratch, and it has a lot of really unique, amazing features. So let's jump into it.
okay, so I think the game is queued up. Is it going to let me play? Oh, the sound is on. Is that too loud? Or are you okay with that? Did you hear that?
Uh, I think it's gonna be pretty loud to talk over you. Yeah, I think you can at least let it run a few times and then cut the sound so they can hear it.
Okay.
Maybe cut it down first, talk about it a little bit, and then turn the sound back on.
I want to know how you turn the sound off. You can kind of see here, these little dots on the left here, which I am explaining. These are the pay lines. I'm going to set for 10 auto spins and let it go. This particular thing forces me to set a loss limit even though I'm betting for free. So I'm just going to max those out so it doesn't stop. We're just going to let this roll for 10 spins. If it does trigger the free spin bonus, which is what we're hoping it will do, it will actually go into the free spin bonus. And that's kind of what we're going to play this for. Oh, come on.
No, for now.
Okay. Thank God.
The other thing to point out here, it looks like, and you could try it,
Okay.
you could use as well.
Do I have the gap? I don't have that. Do I?
Bottom right there in blue. Keep
This?
going. Keep going. No, you can actually preset it if you want to.
I
What you
could
want to do is in the middle.
do the Cleopatra, the
You can do
bonus, right?
four scarabs or Cleopatra or something like that.
No, I don't care about that now. I can just, it's just going to trigger. There it is. Oh my God. Wow. Which one is this? Vegas Slots Online. That's awesome.
So I think what we can do is we'll restart this. I think what we can do is just let it spin with the sound a little bit.
Yeah. I'm just a dumbass. Okay. So we're going to start. It's going to kick off for 50 free spins. Hopefully we'll hit the scatter bonus. The scatter bonus is 3 Sphinx, which will enter 15 free spins. A Sphinx is right there. So we need 3 of those to enter the free spin. What'll happen is that once we win, it will give us these lines, and those lines will tell us how much we actually won. So in this case, with 3 beetles, gave us 50 cents because we doubled. Which a beetle is probably the most insignificant pay on this machine. Maybe a jack is probably worse. The top symbol is the Cleopatra, which is here. And if you do get 5 of these, then you get the 10,000 bet, which is the life-changing event of this slot machine. You can see the lines visualizing as you spin. It actually shows you how you win. Typical. Newer titles offer buy-in bonuses.
I think that the buy a bonus is actually pretty important with some of the newer titles because you can skip all these spins, and typically it takes 30 to 50 spins to get into the bonus round.
That would be fantastic, yeah. But
But I
I
like
guess
to think the experience of the game itself, right?
exactly. And we're trying to have the feel of this game, but you can kind of
Talking
see
about feel, why don't we turn the sound on and get the whole experience of it?
that might be too loud. So let's kill some of the sound. Okay, a little bit better.
Yep. I think they get the point of the sound.
I think they do too. And the sound is key, especially in a land-based environment, because that's actually what's going to trigger the eyes to move to the game. Now, keep in mind, in a land-based world, there's hundreds of slot machines, so there's lots of sounds, but that is the key they're going for. And so we haven't entered the bonus yet, and we have 28 more free spins. So, is there anything we should talk about more on this game?
We could talk about it
I,
takes. What do you think?
Let me talk about the random number generator a little bit because I think that's a decent deep dive here. Every time
Yep.
this spins, what you don't see is it's actually triggering a number, and that number is actually telling you the real set you're seeing here. So once you hit the button, it'll trigger a number, let's just say 565, and that is this actual pay line you're going to get. So each one of these free spin bonuses has the specific random number generator. The random number generators are not infinite by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, that's actually how they actually determine the probability and the RTP of the game. Talk about how to get this thing live, Tim.
I think we should start on the back of the house thing first. We call it RGS, Remote Game Server. This is where all the logic, the presentation, everything you see, the math, everything that Chris just mentioned is put into a database, into a server somewhere. It's hosted. When you go to any online gaming site, specifically online wise, it will be in a server, it could be in AWS. If you go to a website and play this game, what actually happens is you have an account with that company, but you're launching this game through the RGS server through IGT. I want to talk about how to get it live. Obviously, there's a huge amount of development that goes into a game. If it's a port or a clone, a port would be something porting from the land-based side. You already have an existing math model, and you're taking the math model to online.
Much like
And you're
Clio would be considered a port.
Yeah, and you're recreating the math model, but you already have an idea. You already have a lot of the assets and everything. So it's a little bit easier from building something from scratch. Building something from scratch can take 6 to 9 months. The port of Cleopatra might be 3 months from end development. A clone would be taking Cleopatra and putting new artwork on it, like in an existing game. Those are really popular if a math model works well. And the tweak would be just tweaking the math model itself. So I say this with that in mind. The development cycle can take anywhere from 3 to 9 months, even 12 months, depending on the titles. There's a lot of money that goes into it in research, development, testing, going in front of players. But let's assume all that's done and now we're ready to get live. Well, we can't get live, even though we proved the math model works. We like the game itself, that we think it will resonate with players, but then it had to go through regulatory testing. Every single game on a legitimate site, that's a regulated site, has to go through regulatory testing. In the case of like Pennsylvania, you're going to have to go through a company like GLI, which is the Gaming Labs Incorporated, which basically does the regulatory testing for the agency. And all that means is it's protecting the player. If we say the game's going to be a 95% RTP, they'll do a ton of tests and validate that everything we said will actually be what the game actually does. And they'll do a report, and then eventually the regulator, in the case of Pennsylvania, the PGCB, the Pennsylvania Gaming Control Board, will actually approve the game. That process, like I said, can take a very long time. It's different whether you're in UK and you're playing this in the UK or in the US or Canada. There's different rules and regulations depending on each individual market. I mentioned about rigged and they test the hold and RTP that we talked about earlier. It's rigged from the standpoint it's math, but it's really not rigged. It's highly regulated, and you can trust that even though you might lose, you can trust the fact that you're going to lose the amount they say they're going to lose over the long term. All right, so that kind of holds all this. I will say there's one kind of art that they put in here, something called malfunction voids all pays and plays. It's a term that you'll see in a lot of casinos all over the place, a lot of slot machines. It basically says if there's a bug in the game, we don't have to pay you. Players hate this. Sometimes casinos honor it even if there's a loss. Everyone has stories where, hey, I won this jackpot and they told me it was a false jackpot and they gave me a free room rather than pay me out the jackpot. So that's kind of their terms and conditions. They find a way to not pay if something malfunctions. They have that clause, that legal clause to kind of get out of some pay. That said, it's not really fair. It's frustrating. I know if I were a player and that happened to me, that would be extremely frustrating. But it happens very rarely because these games are tested so rigorously. But it does happen occasionally, every once in a while.
It would definitely be a buzzkill. So would you say it's rigged, but confidently and trustworthily rigged? Can't
When I
even
say
say
rig,
that.
yeah, exactly. But no, I say
Trustworthy.
if you play on a regulated site, you know you're not going to send your money to some random person. They're not going to take your credit cards. You know the game's fair. If you do it on the unregulated site, you could run a risk of, the game not being fair or
Or,
something worse.
or just never getting your money back.
Exactly. And so I know people get frustrated with that too if you play on offshore casinos and things like that. I'm not saying I'm validating the regulated market, but there's a lot more protections from a player standpoint, uh, in the regulated space.
I feel we can confidently say that you should choose a regulated operator in a regulated jurisdiction over the opposite.
So I guess this kind of leads to how did they decide even what to build to begin with? That's a very interesting question. I mean, it could be from market feedback, talking to players. On the land based side, before a game that you see even on the floor, they'll do tests and have players come in and do game tests on the machine itself. And a lot of times they'll franchise games. So we're playing Cleopatra, for instance. You'll see Cleopatra 2 or Megabucks Cleopatra, Megaways, and they'll do a franchise of games that they know work that are proven.
Yeah, I think IGT currently has 10 Cleopatra themes.
Exactly. So there's innovation. They have certain innovation, like a game we might play later, like Da Vinci Diamonds was a very innovative, similar to Candy Crush. We had tumbling reels, where if you won it, filled up. That was a great mechanic some years back. If a game works and it takes 6 to 12 months of development at a high cost, and we know a game that's already working, why not use the math model with a different theme? And so they balance it out between new development as well as cloning and ports and things like that to create a healthy roadmap.
Exactly. Hey, we did it. Look at that.
All right. I think we should do the sound on.
That was like on cue. All right. So this is what a free spin bonus looks like or sounds like. Kill the volume out a little bit more. There you go. So it basically will give you 15 free spins, and whatever you win, you get to keep. It generally does this pretty quick. It'll notify you the number of spins. We're not having much luck in this particular free spin bonus. You know, there are times when you can win hundreds in this. We're just not doing that. But we did 3 queens. It was a small, insignificant win. Here we go. So close. You really need the double feature. You need the Cleopatra for this to be worthwhile. This is shaping up to probably be one of the worst bonus wins of all time. That was okay. Still not huge. I mean, you're telling me I'm winning 6 cents here. I guess it's going to tell me the percentage of wins. I think it was only at 20 cents a spin. So we got 2 more free spins left. We haven't won anything for a little while. And we got one more, the final guy. Looks like we got skunked.
Enjoy your reward.
$6.73 on a 20-cent bid. I should have had a higher line bet. So, yeah. Anyway, lower risk and reward.
I do remember one time we launched a game and there was a case where you get skunked in the bonus round, and players absolutely hated it. Because when you go to the bonus round, there's a mental thing of like you have to win, you know, and so they quickly pull that game back and fix that and never did that again.
Yeah, that was a bizarre hurdle when you actually go into the bonus and then you don't win and you leave empty. It's kind of the opposite of that dopamine you get when you get to the bonus.
You'll leave the game quickly. Do we want to talk about? I mean, we're 30 minutes in. This might be a good stopping point, but I'm curious if we want to get into more deeper data in terms of how they would actually launch games and things like that with the submarket analysis. Or should we save that for the next?
No, let's address it. So one of the things I created, Tim, you were very honest about RGS. And before we jump to the data part, who actually invented RGS?
WagerWorks. We were the first one that launched an RGS that was out there. Before then, it's like you had to take the entire platform and their games, and you couldn't get anyone else's games, and came up with this concept of completely separating it out where you could take other people's games.
Yeah. In the old days, there were 2 ways of doing it. You either took the entire platform, which was the banking and all of the back end and all the games, and you could not have any competitive games. Or you could launch games through a thing called FogF, which was the equivalent to basically dumping a game through a CD onto your website. And for IGT, that was completely the honors system because we had no idea how much actually was being played. So we had to deal with the operator to get a total number of handle, hold, win outcomes, and all of that.
You effectively build the game on their platform.
And for years and years and years, we obviously knew we probably were getting shortchanged a little bit on the FogF stuff, but we had no idea how to actually use the data because we didn't actually have any data really, except a aggregate number every month. But with RGS, that all changed. And so what you see here, I mean, essentially how you can pivot your audience is to take a game like Cleopatra, which is a scatter bonus, as you see the 3 bonuses ringing there, and an Egyptian theme. It's about a 95 or 94.05% RTP.
Somewhere.
Use those as data points to dictate your customer base. And so once you have the RGS system involved and you get the player outcomes, which we also had, you could actually get transactional outcomes. But you can also build a huge understanding of your player base. And that is just from aggregating a player's daily game from this. So, yeah.
What does that all mean? So let's say you have all the data. I think a lot of companies have data, but it's making sense of it. What would you do with the data once you have all this data? Why would this be helpful?
Good question, Tim. The best way of looking at it is you have the entire ability of changing all of these levers on this game, whether it's the RTP, the volatility, the theme, basic symbols. You could do A and B tests on symbols if you want to see, how people react to various symbols. Most importantly, you can find exit and entry points. When does a player typically leave a game? With Cleopatra, what we found is that after you win the free spin bonus, you will bet about 5 more hands and then you'll probably go away. You'll come back because you're going to play to get that free spin bonus. That's kind of like the hook. But typically, after you get that, you tend to exit within a few short spins thereafter.
Yeah, I remember early days when we were working on this. I was excited because you could use it to determine games in the roadmap. For example, I remember the time we discussed, well, is there an optimal time to launch another Egyptian style game? You don't want to launch 5 Egyptian themed games on the same day. So you space it out. There's a curve.
Yeah.
I remember this is aging ourselves a bit, but there was a curve that we had that it was like the optimal point to launch a new theme, like when we talk about franchises.
Correct. One of the things I did was I took all of our slot content, our entire portfolio, and broke it down into 13 different game types. I called it the submarket analysis. When I look at a game, I'm thinking, how do I win? With Cleopatra, you're going to win for the free spin bonus, typically, and so that's kind of its own like theme, or it's a game mechanic, and so we had about 13 or 14 different game mechanics in our portfolio. At the time, it was about 110 slots. I had my data science team run a bunch of numbers. And what you found is that each one of these submarkets essentially had its own kind of demand life cycle. And what you could do is you could take the most optimal time to refurbish a new title using those submarket analyses. The submarket analysis had about 20 different components to it. So it was more complicated than just saying, let's launch bonuses every 6 weeks. But at the end of the day, that was the most optimal way to launch slots.
And I think it's tricky though, because now there can be multiple game providers into one operator. So imagine there's 15 different game suppliers feeding games to an operator. If you might pick a roadmap that, oh, we're going to launch another Egyptian themed game, but then a competitor or 5 competitors are doing the same thing. So I think from an operator perspective, this could be extremely useful as well, knowing when to launch a game and the themes across multiple different game suppliers.
Yeah, if you wanted to get super complicated, as a supplier, you don't have the data of the other operator or the other distributors, but you do have the number of games they've launched. There were always times when a certain theme would get hot. I remember Asian themes were hot for a while and everybody built them. When they launched, there were like 10 new ones at a time. So nobody really was successful in that process, except maybe one.
100%.
I think
Okay.
that's called 88 Fortunes or something.
Yeah, it's
That's
Light
another,
Wonders, right?
yeah, it's another one of the slots we'll look at, but it's not an IGT slot.
Yeah, we started with IDT. This is a classic game, and we both worked at this company years ago. And frankly, this is the game, one of my first games I've ever played early days when I walked into a land-based casino. So I think it's a good place to start. We'll start with a wide variety of other providers and do a similar type of deep dive analysis and go from there.
What we did was this was an index game. This basically dictated our month to month performance. It was an evergreen title. Its performance month over month was essentially the same. And sometimes it actually increased.
All right, this is our first episode. We'll get into sports in the next one, but we want to start there and want to thank you for joining us. Hope you made it this far. If you did, make sure you like, comment, tell us your favorite slot. If you want to see us do a certain game or talk about a certain game, or you want more insider information and stories, just let us know. Drop a comment.
Sounds great.
Have a nice day.
All right. Thanks, everybody.